The dust from the Santa Fe Railroad train billowed around Lillian Fairchild as she stepped onto the wooden platform of Douglas, Arizona's depot, her heart racing with anticipation and nerves. It was September 1885, and after traveling nearly 2,000 miles from Boston, she had finally reached her destination and the man who would become her husband. At least, that had been the plan. Lillian clutched the wrinkled letter in her gloved hand, reading the words once more, though she had long since memorized them. "I will be waiting at the depot upon your arrival. You will recognize me by my tall stature and the red handkerchief in my breast pocket." The letter was signed simply, "Your intended George Wilson." The platform gradually emptied as passengers collected their luggage and greeted waiting family members. Lillian stood alone, her trunk at her feet, scanning faces for a tall man with a red handkerchief. Minutes stretched into an hour, and still there was no sign of George. "Excuse me, miss," a station attendant approached her. "The depot will be closing soon. Is there someone coming for you?" Lillian swallowed hard. "Yes, I'm sure he's just delayed. Mr. Wilson promised to meet me." The attendant gave her a pitying look. "Wilson? George Wilson?" At Lillian's nod, he removed his cap. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, miss, but George Wilson passed away 3 weeks ago. Typhoid fever took him fast." The world seemed to spin around Lillian. Dead. Her intended husband was dead, and no one had thought to inform her. She had sold all her possessions, left her position as a schoolteacher, and traveled across the country to marry a man who was already in his grave. I have nowhere to go," she whispered, more to herself than to the attendant. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the platform. Lillian fought back tears as she contemplated her options. She had only $15 to her name, not enough for a return ticket to Boston, and certainly not enough to establish herself in a strange town. From across the platform, a tall figure approached. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could see he was watching her. As he drew closer, Lillian noticed his strong jaw covered with a neatly trimmed beard and piercing blue eyes that seemed to assess her situation in an instant. He removed his worn brown cowboy hat, revealing sun-lightened brown hair, and stopped a respectful distance away. "Pardon me, madam." "I couldn't help overhearing. You're George Wilson's intended," Lillian nodded, unable to find words as she tried to maintain her composure. The man held his hat against his chest. "Name's Hayes Kilpatrick. I own the ranch neighboring Wilson's place. I'm mighty sorry about your situation." "George was a good man." "Thank you, Mr. Kilpatrick," Lillian managed. "I'm afraid I've found myself in quite a predicament." Hayes studied her for a moment, taking in her travel-worn appearance, the quality of her dress that spoke of Eastern refinement, and the desperation she was trying so hard to hide. "Madam," he said finally, his voice deep and steady, "I know it's not proper and you have no reason to trust me, but I couldn't live with myself leaving a lady in your situation. If you need a place, I will be yours." Lillian stared at him, uncertain she had heard correctly. "I beg your pardon." Hayes cleared his throat. "What I mean to say is, I can offer you a position at my ranch, as a housekeeper if you'd be willing. It's not what you came here for, I know, but it would give you time to decide what you want to do next." Relief washed over Lillian, tempered with caution. This stranger was offering her sanctuary, but she knew nothing about him. Still, what choice did she have? "That's very kind, Mr. Kilpatrick, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition, miss." "Fairchild, Lillian Fairchild, Miss Fairchild. Truth is, my place could use a woman's touch." "Been living like a bachelor too long." He offered a small smile that softened his weathered features. "I can pay you fair wages and you'll have your own room. My foreman's wife, Martha, lives on the property too, so you'd have another woman nearby." Lillian considered her options, which were none, and nodded. "I accept your offer, Mr. Kilpatrick. Thank you." Hayes replaced his hat and lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "My wagon's just down the street. Can I help you with anything else?" Lillian glanced once more around the empty depot, as if George Wilson might materialize after all. "No, Mr. Kilpatrick, this is everything." The wagon ride to Hayes's ranch was mostly silent. Lillian was too overwhelmed to make conversation, and Hayes seemed content to let her process everything that had happened. The setting sun painted the desert landscape in hues of orange and pink, illuminating the vastness around them. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels against the skyline, and distant mountains shimmered in the fading light. "It's beautiful," Lillian murmured, despite her distress. Hayes glanced at her. "Different from Boston, I imagine. Very, but there's something honest about it," he nodded approvingly. "That's as good a word as any. The desert doesn't lie, it shows you exactly what it is." As darkness fell, they approached a sprawling ranch house with warm light glowing from its windows. Several outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, and Lillian could make out the shapes of horses moving in one of the pens. "Welcome to the Lazy K," Hayes said as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "It's not much, but it's home." Lillian thought it was grand compared to the tiny apartment she'd shared with 2 other teachers in Boston. "It's lovely, Mr. Kilpatrick." Before Hayes could respond, the front door opened, and a stout woman with gray streaked hair hurried down the steps. "Hayes Kilpatrick, you've been gone all day. I was beginning to worry." She stopped short when she spotted Lillian. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." Hayes helped Lillian down from the wagon. "Martha, this is Miss Lillian Fairchild." She was meant to marry George Wilson, but no one informed her of his passing. "I've offered her a position as housekeeper." Martha's expression softened immediately. "Oh, you poor dear, what a terrible shock that must have been." She took Lillian's hands in her own. "I'm Martha Reynolds. My husband Tom is the foreman here. You come inside now and I'll fix you some supper. You must be exhausted." Lillian felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. Just Martha, dear. We're not much for formalities out here." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly spacious, with a large main room containing both a dining area and a sitting area with comfortable-looking furniture. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, unlit in the September heat. The furnishings were sturdy and practical, though Lillian noted a certain bachelor simplicity to the arrangements. Martha bustled into the kitchen while Hayes carried Lillian's trunk to a room off the main hall. "This will be yours," he said, setting down the heavy trunk. "It's not fancy, but it's private." The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a dresser, and a small writing desk beneath a window that would offer a view of the corral when the curtains were drawn back. "It's perfect," Lillian said sincerely. "Thank you again for your kindness, Mr. Kilpatrick. I don't know what I would have done." "Hayes," he corrected gently. "And you don't need to thank me. Out here we look after folks in need. It's how we survive." Over a simple but satisfying meal of beef stew and cornbread, Martha filled Lillian in on the rhythms of life at the Lazy K. "Hayes has about 30 hands during roundup season, but only 10 or so stay year-round. Tom and I have been with Hayes since he started the ranch 8 years ago. The bunkhouse is a good quarter-mile from the main house, so you won't be bothered by the men." "I've never been a housekeeper before," Lillian admitted. "I was a schoolteacher in Boston." Hayes looked up with interest. "A schoolteacher? Douglas could use one of those." "The town's growing, but the closest school is in Bisbee, nearly 30 miles away." "Really?" Lillian felt a spark of hope. Perhaps she could rebuild her life here after all. "Something to think about," Hayes said. "For now, don't worry about the housekeeping. Martha can show you what needs doing." The place could use a good woman's touch. Later that night, alone in her room, Lillian finally allowed herself to cry. She wept for the future she had imagined with George Wilson, a man she had never met but with whom she had exchanged letters for nearly 6 months. She wept for her lost position in Boston, for the familiar life she had abandoned. And she wept from the sheer emotional exhaustion of the day. When her tears were spent, she washed her face with water from the pitcher on the dresser and changed into her nightgown. As she was about to blow out the lamp, a soft knock came at her door. "Miss Fairchild," Hayes's voice was low, "I have something for you." Lillian quickly wrapped her robe around herself and opened the door a crack. Hayes stood in the hallway, holding a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "I found this among George's things when I helped settle his affairs," he explained. "It's addressed to you. I should have given it to you earlier, but with everything happening so fast." Lillian took the package with trembling hands. "Thank you." Hayes nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Good night, Miss Fairchild. Good night, Hayes." When he had gone, Lillian sat on the edge of her bed and carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small, leather-bound book, a collection of Tennyson's poems, and a letter. She opened the letter with shaking fingers. "My dear Miss Fairchild," it began. "By the time you read this, I will have welcomed you to Arizona and perhaps even made you my wife. I want you to know how deeply I appreciate your courage in coming to me, sight unseen. I promise to do everything in my power to make you happy in your new home. Enclosed is a small token of my affection. May Tennyson's words bring you comfort when mine fail. Yours with anticipation, George Wilson." Fresh tears slid down Lillian's cheeks as she clutched the book to her chest. George Wilson had been a thoughtful man, at least. She would never know what kind of husband he might have been. Wiping away her tears, Lillian replaced the letter in the book and set it on the small table beside her bed. Tomorrow would be a new day, and she would face it with the same courage that had brought her across the country. She had no other choice. The morning light streamed through the window, waking Lillian earlier than she was accustomed to. For a moment she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she sighed heavily. She washed and dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, pinning her chestnut hair into a practical bun. When she emerged from her room, she found Martha already bustling about the kitchen, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the air. "Good morning, dear," Martha greeted her warmly. "I hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected, thank you," Lillian replied honestly. "Hayes and the men have already been up for hours," Martha explained, nodding toward the window where Lillian could see figures moving among the corrals. "They eat before dawn, but I saved you some breakfast." Lillian ate quickly, eager to begin earning her keep. "What would you like me to do first?" Martha wiped her hands on her apron. "Hayes mentioned you might be interested in teaching. If that's the case, you'll need proper clothes for ranch life while you're here. I have some things that might fit you with a bit of alteration." By mid-morning, Lillian had changed into a borrowed skirt and shirtwaist that were more practical for the dusty environment. Martha showed her around the main house, explaining the daily tasks that needed attention. "Hayes keeps to himself mostly," Martha told her. "He eats supper with us but takes his other meals when he can. He's a good man, though, works harder than any of his hands." "How did he come to own such a large ranch at his age?" Lillian asked, guessing Hayes to be in his early 30s. "He came out here with nothing but determination about 8 years ago, worked for old man Bentley up north, saved every penny. When Bentley died, he left Hayes enough to buy this place. It was just scrubland then, not much to look at. Hayes built it up from nothing." Lillian was impressed despite herself. "He must be very dedicated." "Too dedicated, if you ask me," Martha said with a knowing look. "Man his age should have a wife and children, but he's married to this ranch. Never seen him give a second glance to any of the young ladies in town." Lillian busied herself with dusting to hide her blush. It wasn't proper to discuss a man's marital status, especially not her employer's. The days fell into a pattern. Lillian would rise early, though never quite as early as Hayes and his ranch hands. She would help Martha with breakfast preparation, then spend the day cleaning, mending, and learning the ways of the ranch. Hayes would return in the evenings, tired but always courteous, inquiring about her day before retreating to his study after supper. A week into her stay, Lillian was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see Hayes riding toward her, his horse kicking up dust in the morning sun. He dismounted smoothly and approached, removing his hat. "Miss Fairchild, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mr. Kilpatrick Hayes," she corrected herself. "Is something wrong?" "No, quite the opposite. I've been into town this morning and spoke with Mr. Daniels, who runs the general store. He's also on the town council. They're very interested in establishing a school in Douglas and were quite excited when I mentioned your qualifications." Lillian's heart leaped. "Truly," Hayes nodded, a rare smile crossing his features. "They'd like to meet with you as soon as possible." "I thought perhaps tomorrow, if you're willing." "Yes, of course." Lillian exclaimed, then composed herself. That would be most agreeable. Thank you for speaking on my behalf. It's a selfish motive, I assure you, Hayes said, his blue eyes twinkling. The sooner Douglas has a proper school, the sooner the town will grow, and the more customers I'll have for my beef. Lillian laughed, surprising herself with the sound. It had been some time since she had felt any lightness in her heart. Well, I'm happy to contribute to your business success then. Hayes replaced his hat, still smiling. I'll take you into town tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock suit you? Perfectly. As he turned to leave, Lillian called after him, Hayes, thank you for everything. He paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. You're welcome, Lillian. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. The next morning, Lillian dressed in her best traveling suit, a navy blue ensemble that emphasized her slender figure and brought out the gray in her eyes. She had taken extra care with her appearance, pinning her hair in a sophisticated style that she hoped conveyed both professionalism and respectability. Hayes was waiting by the wagon when she emerged from the house. He wore a clean shirt and had trimmed his beard, looking more the prosperous rancher than the working cowboy she usually saw. You look nice, he said simply, helping her onto the wagon seat. Thank you, so do you. The ride into Douglas was pleasant, the morning still cool before the heat of the day set in. Hayes pointed out landmarks along the way, telling her about the area's history and the changes he'd seen since arriving. The silver mines brought the first settlers, but ranching's what will sustain the town in the long run, he explained. That and the railroad makes shipping cattle a lot easier than the old cattle drives. Did you ever participate in those? Lillian asked, curious about his past. A few. Hard work, dangerous too, lost some good men and a lot of cattle in river crossings and storms. He glanced at her. Not a glamorous life, despite what those dime novels would have you believe. Douglas was bigger than Lillian had expected, with several streets of buildings, including a hotel, saloon, general store, and various other businesses. People nodded respectfully to Hayes as they passed, and he returned their greetings with a touch to his hat brim. Folks know you well, Lillian observed. Small town, Hayes replied, and I do a fair bit of business here. He helped her down in front of a large building that served as both the general store and post office. Mr. Daniels and some of the council members should be inside. Indeed they were. Albert Daniels, a portly man with spectacles and a friendly smile, greeted them warmly. With him were two other men, William Foster, the banker, and Henry Cartwright, who owned the hotel. Miss Fairchild, it's a pleasure, Mr. Daniels said, shaking her hand enthusiastically. Hayes here tells us you were a schoolteacher back east. Yes, in Boston for 5 years, Lillian confirmed. I taught children from ages 6 to 12. The men nodded approvingly, and what followed was something of an informal interview. They asked about her education, teaching methods, and experience. Lillian answered confidently, falling back into her professional demeanor with ease. The truth is, Miss Fairchild, Mr. Foster said finally, we've been trying to establish a school for nearly 2 years, but finding a qualified teacher willing to come to Douglas has been impossible. Your arrival seems providential. We can't offer much in the way of salary yet, Mr. Cartwright added, but we have a building that could serve as a schoolhouse with some renovation, and there would be living quarters attached. I would need to see the building, of course, Lillian said, but I am very interested. When might the school open? The men exchanged glances. With winter coming, construction would be easier now than waiting for spring, Mr. Daniels said. Perhaps by November, if we start right away, that would be wonderful, Lillian said sincerely. In the meantime, I'm happy to continue my arrangement with Mr. Kilpatrick. Hayes, who had been silent during the exchange, nodded. Miss Fairchild is welcome at the Lazy K for as long as she needs. After they left the store, Hayes suggested they visit the potential schoolhouse. It was a small, single-room building that had previously served as a meeting hall. It would need considerable work, but Lillian could envision how it might look with desks, a blackboard, and children filling the space. What do you think? Hayes asked as she examined the adjoining room that would become her living quarters. It has potential, Lillian said thoughtfully. It will need a lot of work, though. I can spare some of my men to help with the renovations, Hayes offered, and lumber from my property. Lillian looked at him in surprise. That's very generous. Hayes shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Like I said, a school is good for the town, and what's good for the town is good for business. But Lillian suspected there was more to his generosity than business concerns. They ate lunch at the hotel restaurant, where Hayes was again greeted with respect by everyone they encountered. Lillian noticed several young women eyeing him appreciatively, but he seemed oblivious to their attention. As they were finishing their meal, a commotion outside drew their notice. Raised voices and the sound of breaking glass had Hayes on his feet immediately. "Stay here," he instructed Lillian, moving swiftly to the door, but curiosity got the better of her, and she followed him onto the boardwalk. A few buildings down, two men were engaged in a heated argument that seemed on the verge of becoming physical. One was clearly drunk, swaying on his feet as he shouted accusations at the other. To Lillian's alarm, Hayes strode directly toward the altercation. She watched anxiously as he positioned himself between the two men, speaking in a low, authoritative voice she couldn't quite hear. The sober man backed down almost immediately, but the drunk one took more convincing. Finally, Hayes placed a firm hand on the drunk man's shoulder and guided him toward the hotel. As they passed where Lillian stood, she could hear Hayes speaking. "Sleep it off, Pete. Whatever your grievance with Jenkins, it can wait until you're sober." "He cheated me," the man slurred. "Maybe so, but getting yourself shot won't solve anything," Hayes replied patiently. Inside the hotel, Hayes spoke briefly with the clerk, who nodded and took the drunk man upstairs. When Hayes returned to Lillian, his expression was apologetic. "I'm sorry about that. Pete Hollister is usually a decent fellow, but he has a problem with whiskey." "You handled that very well," Lillian observed, impressed by his calm authority. Hayes shrugged. "Been in the middle of enough fights to know how to stop one before it starts. Shall we head back to the ranch?" "I'm sure you've had enough excitement for one day." On the ride back, Lillian found herself studying Hayes's profile as he focused on the road ahead. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that seemed to draw people to him. She could understand why the townspeople respected him, despite his relatively young age for a man of his position. "You're staring," Hayes said without looking at her, a hint of amusement in his voice. Lillian flushed. "I apologize. I was just thinking that you seem to have a natural gift for leadership, the way people respond to you." "Experience, not a gift," Hayes replied. "You learn a lot about handling men when your decisions can mean life or death on a cattle drive. Still, it's impressive." Hayes glanced at her then, a hint of a smile lifting one corner of his mouth. "You're not what I expected from an Eastern schoolteacher, Miss Fairchild." "No, what did you expect? Someone more rigid, less adaptable. You've taken to ranch life better than most city folks I've seen." Lillian smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment, and please, after all this time, I wish you'd call me Lillian." "Lillian," he repeated, her name sounding rich in his deep voice. "It suits you." Over the next few weeks, Lillian settled into life at the Lazy K with increasing comfort. Her days were busy with household tasks and preparations for the school. Hayes often took her into town to oversee the renovations of the schoolhouse, and word spread quickly that Douglas would soon have its own school. Several families had already approached Lillian about enrolling their children. One evening in early October, as Lillian sat on the porch mending one of Hayes's shirts, she heard the sound of a guitar coming from the side of the house. Curious, she set aside her sewing and followed the music. She found Hayes sitting on a bench near the corral, his fingers moving skillfully over the strings as he played a melancholy tune. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice her approach until she was nearly beside him. "I didn't know you played," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Hayes looked up, his expression briefly unguarded in a way she had never seen before. "My mother taught me long time ago. It's beautiful. Would you mind if I listened for a while?" He hesitated, then nodded, shifting slightly on the bench to make room for her. Lillian sat beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. Though the bench wasn't large, Hayes began playing again, a different tune this time, still melancholy but with a hint of sweetness to it. Lillian closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. It had been so long since she'd had the luxury of simply sitting and appreciating beauty of any kind. When the song ended, she opened her eyes to find Hayes watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "My father would have called that frivolous," she said with a small smile. He believed music was a waste of time that could be better spent on practical pursuits. "And what do you believe?" Hayes asked. Lillian considered the question seriously. "I believe beauty has its own purpose. It reminds us why the practical things matter at all." Hayes nodded slowly. "Your father sounds like a stern man." He was, very concerned with appearances and social standing. He never forgave me for becoming a teacher instead of marrying the banker's son he had selected for me. "Is that why you agreed to be a mail-order bride, to escape him?" "No," Lillian said softly. "My father died 2 years ago, but after he was gone, I realized I was living the life he had chosen for me, not the one I wanted. When I saw Mr. Wilson's advertisement, it seemed like a chance for something different, a new beginning." Hayes set the guitar aside. "And now?" "What kind of beginning do you want now?" Lillian looked out at the darkening landscape, the mountains silhouetted against the twilight sky. "I'm not sure anymore. Teaching again will be wonderful, but—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the restlessness she felt. "But it's not enough." Hayes suggested gently. She turned to look at him, surprised by his perception. "No, I don't suppose it is. I came here expecting to be a wife and mother, to build a life with someone. Teaching is my calling, but I always hoped for a family as well." Hayes was silent for a long moment. "You're young yet, there's time." "Perhaps," Lillian agreed, though she wasn't entirely convinced. "What about you? Have you never wanted a family of your own?" A shadow crossed Hayes's face. "Once, a long time ago." He didn't elaborate, and Lillian didn't press him. They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Hayes stood. "It's getting cold. We should go in." He offered his hand to help her up, and Lillian took it, feeling the calluses on his palm from years of ranch work. His hand was warm around hers, strong and steady. For a brief moment, neither of them moved to let go, and something unspoken passed between them. Then Hayes released her hand and picked up his guitar. "Good night, Lillian. Good night, Hayes." As Lillian lay in bed that night, she found herself thinking about Hayes more than she should. There was a depth to him that she hadn't expected, a sensitivity beneath his rugged exterior, and when he had held her hand, even for that brief moment. She turned onto her side, scolding herself for such thoughts. Hayes Kilpatrick was her employer and benefactor, nothing more. In a few weeks, she would move into town and begin her new life as Douglas's schoolteacher. It was foolish to develop any sort of attachment to him. Yet as sleep claimed her, it was Hayes's face she saw in her dreams and the sound of his guitar that followed her into slumber. The next morning, Lillian woke to the sound of heavy rain on the roof, unusual for the typically dry climate. She dressed quickly and found Martha in the kitchen, looking concerned. "This is bad timing," Martha said, nodding toward the window where rain was coming down in sheets. "The men were supposed to move cattle from the north pasture today. That creek floods something terrible in a heavy rain." Before Lillian could respond, the front door banged open and Hayes strode in, dripping wet and mud splattered. "Martha, is Tom back yet?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. "No, not since he rode out with you at dawn," Martha replied, her face paling. Hayes cursed under his breath. "The creek's already rising. I sent him and 2 of the boys to start moving the herd, but they're not at the rendezvous point." "I'll get some coffee on," Martha said, her voice trembling slightly. Hayes turned to leave, then noticed Lillian standing in the doorway. "Lillian, I'm sorry about the mess." "Don't worry about that," she said quickly. "Is there anything I can do to help?" He shook his head. "Stay inside. If this keeps up, we might have problems with the road washing out." With that, he was gone again, the door slamming behind him. The day passed tensely. Martha alternated between preparing food for the men and standing at the window, watching for any sign of her husband. Lillian kept busy, trying to distract both of them with tasks around the house, but her own worry grew as the hours passed and the rain continued unabated. By mid-afternoon, 3 more ranch hands had returned, soaked and exhausted, but there was no sign of Tom, the other hand who had been with him, or Hayes, who had gone back out to search for them. The creeks turned into a river, one of the men reported as Lillian served them hot coffee. Never seen it rise so fast. Just before dusk, Lillian heard shouting outside. She and Martha rushed to the door to see Hayes riding in, another man slumped in front of him on the horse. Behind him, another rider was helping support a third man on his horse. Tom. Martha cried, running into the rain. Lillian grabbed a lantern and followed. Hayes was carefully lowering Tom from the saddle, the older man's face gray with pain. His legs broken, Hayes explained as they helped Tom toward the house. Got caught between his horse and a tree when the animal spooked at the flash flood. And Andy? Martha asked, glancing at the second injured man being helped inside. Dislocated shoulder, but he'll be all right. Could have been much worse. Once inside, Lillian helped Martha tend to the injured men while Hayes conferred with the other hands about the cattle. Many had been lost to the flash flood, swept away before they could be moved to higher ground. Later, after the doctor had been summoned from town to set Tom's leg properly and the ranch had quieted, Lillian found Hayes alone in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "You should get some rest," she said gently. "You've been going since before dawn." Hayes looked up, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "I lost 30 head at least, maybe more when we can do a proper count." Lillian sat across from him. "But no men, thanks to you. Martha told me you went into the floodwaters to pull Andy out when his horse went down." Hayes shrugged. "Did what anyone would do?" "No," Lillian said firmly. "Not anyone would risk their life like that. You're a good man, Hayes Kilpatrick." He met her gaze, and the raw emotion she saw there took her breath away. "Not always," he said quietly. "I've made my share of mistakes. Haven't we all?" Lillian replied. Without thinking, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "But today, you were a hero." Hayes looked down at her hand covering his, then slowly turned his palm up to clasp her fingers. "Thank you for helping with Tom and Andy. You kept a cool head." "I've dealt with my share of schoolyard injuries," Lillian said with a small smile, though nothing quite so serious. Hayes's thumb moved gently over the back of her hand, sending a shiver up her arm. "You surprise me, Lillian Fairchild. Every day you surprise me." The intensity of his gaze made her heart race, and for a moment Lillian thought he might say more. But then he released her hand and stood up, the moment broken. "I should check on the men," he said. "Good night, Lillian." "Good night," she whispered, watching him go and wondering at the tumult of emotions his touch had awakened in her. The aftermath of the flood kept everyone at the Lazy K busy for days. With Tom injured, Hayes had to reorganize the work schedules, and even Martha was pressed into helping more than usual with the ranch operations. Lillian took over most of the household duties, freeing Martha to care for her husband. A week after the flood, Lillian was preparing a stew for supper when Hayes entered the kitchen. He had been gone since before dawn, assessing the damage to the northern pastures. "Something smells good," he said, washing his hands at the pump by the sink. "Just a simple beef stew," Lillian replied. "How are things looking out there?" "Better than I feared. We lost fewer cattle than I thought, and the fences can be repaired before winter sets in." He dried his hands on a towel, watching her as she worked. "You look at home in that kitchen." Lillian smiled, pushing a strand of hair back from her face. "I've learned a lot from Martha. I had never cooked much before coming here." "Your husband would have been a lucky man," Hayes said quietly. Lillian's hands stilled on the wooden spoon. "George Wilson, you mean?" "Yes." Hayes leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "Did you love him?" The question surprised her. "No, how could I? I never met him, but I hoped I might grow to love him in time." "And was that enough for you? The hope of eventual affection?" Lillian considered the question seriously. "At the time, yes. I wanted security, a home of my own, perhaps children someday. Love seemed secondary to those practical concerns. And now I think differently." Lillian met his gaze steadily. I've seen what a marriage without love looks like. My parents tolerated each other at best. I don't want that for myself anymore, Hayes nodded slowly. Wise decision. Before Lillian could respond, Martha entered the kitchen, ending their private conversation. But throughout the evening, Lillian felt Hayes's eyes on her more than once and wondered at the questions he had asked. The following Sunday, Hayes surprised Lillian by asking if she would like to accompany him to church in Douglas. It would be her first formal introduction to many of the townspeople who would be sending their children to her school. I would love to, she replied, pleased at the opportunity. They rode into town in Hayes's buggy rather than the wagon, a more dignified conveyance for Sunday services. Hayes had dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, and Lillian wore her finest dress, a deep green that complemented her gray eyes and chestnut hair. The small church was nearly full when they arrived. Heads turned as Hayes escorted Lillian to a pew, and she was aware of curious glances and whispers. It was the first time she had appeared publicly with Hayes in a social setting rather than on ranch business. After the service, the minister, Reverend Collins, introduced Lillian formally to the congregation as their new schoolteacher. Many parents approached her afterward, expressing their enthusiasm for the school and introducing their children. Miss Fairchild is staying at my ranch until the schoolhouse is ready, Hayes explained to one curious matron who had inquired about Lillian's living arrangements. Mrs. Reynolds, my foreman's wife, is providing proper chaperonage. The woman nodded approvingly, though Lillian noticed a hint of disappointment in her expression. Later, as they were preparing to leave, she overheard a snippet of conversation between two women. Thought Hayes Kilpatrick might finally be courting someone, but it seems she's just the schoolteacher. More's the pity. He needs a wife to settle him down. Lillian felt her cheeks grow warm. Had the townspeople assumed she and Hayes were courting, the thought both embarrassed and intrigued her. On the ride back to the ranch, Hayes seemed preoccupied. What did you think of Reverend Collins? He asked finally. He seems very dedicated to his congregation, Lillian replied. His sermon was thoughtful. He's a good man. Came here when there wasn't much more than a saloon and a general store. Built that church himself with help from the townspeople. Like you built your ranch, Lillian observed. Hayes glanced at her. Similar, I suppose, though my motives weren't as pure as his. What were your motives, Hayes? Lillian asked, genuinely curious. You've never really told me why you came west. He was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer, then he sighed. I was running away, if I'm being honest. Made some mistakes back in Missouri, hurt some people I cared about, needed a fresh start. What kind of mistakes? Lillian pressed gently. Hayes's hands tightened on the reins. I was engaged to a young woman, Caroline. Her father was a wealthy businessman who didn't approve of me. I was just a cowhand then, no prospects to speak of. But Caroline loved me, or said she did. He paused, his jaw tightening. I caught her with another man's son of a banker, the kind of match her father wanted. She begged me not to tell anyone, said it was a mistake, that she still wanted to marry me. I was young and in love, so I forgave her. Lillian's heart ached for him, already guessing where the story was headed. The night before our wedding, her father came to see me. Offered me $1,000 to leave town, said his daughter had changed her mind but was too afraid to tell me. I refused, of course, went to see Caroline. Hayes's voice grew rough. Found her packing to run away with the banker's son. When she saw me, she broke down, admitted she'd only agreed to marry me to defy her father, never really loved me at all. Oh, Hayes, Lillian murmured, unable to stop herself from placing a hand on his arm. I'm so sorry. He covered her hand briefly with his own. Ancient history now, but I was angry, hurt, got into a fight with the banker's son when I confronted him, put him in the hospital. Nearly went to jail, but Caroline's father made the charges disappear in exchange for my promise to leave town and never contact his daughter again. So you came west, Hayes nodded. With nothing but my horse and what I could carry, worked my way from ranch to ranch, learning everything I could. When I had the chance to buy the Lazy K, I took it, swore I'd build something that was mine alone, something no one could take from me. And you have, Lillian said softly, something remarkable. Hayes looked at her then, his blue eyes intense. Yes, but lately I've been wondering if it's enough. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities, and Lillian found herself unable to look away from his gaze. Then Hayes cleared his throat and returned his attention to the road ahead. The schoolhouse should be finished by the end of the month, he said, changing the subject. Mr. Daniels mentioned they're ordering books and supplies from back east. Yes, they've been very generous, Lillian replied, trying to ignore the flutter of disappointment at the shift in conversation. I'm looking forward to teaching again, though I'll miss. She hesitated, the ranch. Hayes suggested. Yes, Lillian said, and the people there. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, but Lillian's mind was filled with thoughts of Hayes's past and the pain he had endured. It explained so much about him, his self-sufficiency, his caution, his dedication to his ranch above all else. And yet, he had shown her nothing but kindness and respect from the moment they met. Perhaps, she thought, watching his strong profile as he guided the horses, they were not so different after all. Both seeking a new beginning, both guarding their hearts against further hurt. But while she had come to Arizona seeking connection, Hayes had built his life around independence. She wondered if there was room in his carefully constructed world for something more for someone like her. As October drew to a close, preparations for the school opening intensified. The building was nearly complete, with fresh paint, new desks, and a proper blackboard. Lillian spent most of her days in town now, organizing books, creating lesson plans, and meeting with parents who wished to enroll their children. Hayes often drove her into town in the morning and picked her up in the evening, but their conversations had become more guarded since his revelation about his past. Lillian sensed he regretted sharing so much with her and had retreated behind a wall of polite reserve. One afternoon, as Lillian was arranging books on the shelves in the schoolroom, she heard a knock at the open door. Expecting to see Mr. Daniels or another member of the town council, she was surprised to find Hayes standing there, his hat in his hands. Hayes. I wasn't expecting you until later. Had business in town, he explained, stepping into the room and looking around appreciatively. The place is really coming together. Yes, it's wonderful. The children will be here next week for the first day of classes, 23 of them so far. Hayes wandered to the desk at the front of the room, running his hand over its smooth surface. You must be excited to be teaching again. I am, Lillian confirmed, though with less enthusiasm than she might have shown a few weeks earlier. The prospect of moving into the small attached living quarters and leaving the lazy Kay behind had become increasingly bittersweet. I have something for you, Hayes said, reaching into his coat pocket. A small gift for your new classroom. He handed her a small wooden box. Lillian opened it to find a beautiful brass bell polished to a high shine. For calling your students to order, Hayes explained. Every proper school needs one, I'm told. Lillian was touched by his thoughtfulness. It's perfect, Hayes, thank you. There's something else, he said, looking suddenly uncomfortable. I wanted to ask you, that is, I was wondering if you might consider. The door opened again, interrupting whatever Hayes had been about to say. Mr. Daniels entered, carrying a stack of primers. Miss Fairchild, I found these additional readers at the store, he announced, then noticed Hayes. Ah, Mr. Kilpatrick, good to see you. I trust Miss Fairchild has told you about our plans for the school dedication ceremony. Hayes looked at Lillian questioningly. No, she hasn't mentioned it. It's nothing formal, Lillian explained quickly. Just a small gathering the day before classes begin. The parents and children will come to meet me officially and see the schoolroom. And we're hoping you'll say a few words, Mr. Kilpatrick, Mr. Daniels added. Given your contribution to the building and your connection to Miss Fairchild, Hayes's expression was unreadable. Of course, if Miss Fairchild wishes it. I would be honored, Lillian said sincerely. Excellent, Mr. Daniels beamed. Now I'll just put these books away and leave you two to your conversation. When Mr. Daniels had moved to the back of the room, Hayes stepped closer to Lillian, speaking in a low voice. What I was trying to ask before, perhaps we could discuss it on the ride home. Of course, Lillian agreed, curiosity piqued, but when they were in the buggy later, Hayes seemed to have lost his nerve. They were nearly back to the ranch before Lillian gathered her courage to remind him. "You wanted to ask me something earlier." Hayes's hands tightened on the reins. "Yes, it can wait. You have enough on your mind with the school opening." Lillian was disappointed but didn't press him. Whatever he wanted to discuss, it clearly made him uncomfortable, and she didn't want to add to his discomfort. The school dedication was scheduled for the following Saturday, with classes to begin on Monday. As Lillian packed the few belongings she would take to her new quarters in town, she felt a strange reluctance. The Lazy K had become more of a home to her than she had expected, and the thought of leaving it and Hayes created an ache in her chest she couldn't quite explain. On Friday evening, the night before the dedication, Lillian was surprised when Hayes knocked on her bedroom door after supper. "Do you have a moment?" he asked when she opened the door. "Of course," Lillian replied, stepping into the hallway. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. Hayes ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "Would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to show you before you leave tomorrow." Curious, Lillian fetched her shawl and followed Hayes outside. The night was cool but clear, with a bright moon illuminating the ranch yard. Hayes led her past the main buildings toward a small rise overlooking the property. At the top of the rise stood a large oak tree, its branches spreading wide against the star-filled sky. Beneath it was a wooden bench that Lillian had never seen before. "Did you make this?" she asked, running her hand over the smooth wood. Hayes nodded. "Finished it yesterday. Thought it might be a nice place to sit and watch the sunset, or think." Lillian sat down, admiring the view of the ranch below and the distant mountains silhouetted against the night sky. Hayes joined her, leaving a respectable distance between them. "It's beautiful here," Lillian said softly. "I'll miss this view." "It doesn't have to be goodbye," Hayes said, his voice equally quiet. "That's what I've been trying to find the courage to tell you." Lillian's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" Hayes turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I know we haven't known each other long, and you came here expecting to marry someone else. But these past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and kindness, Lillian, I find myself thinking about you all the time." "Hayes," Lillian breathed, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. He took her hand in his touch warm and gentle. "I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. That would be too sudden, I know, but I am asking if you might consider courting properly. I would come to town to see you, take you to dinner, attend church together, and perhaps in time if your feelings match mine." Lillian felt tears spring to her eyes. "Hayes Kilpatrick, are you saying you have feelings for me?" "More than feelings," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Lillian Fairchild, and it terrifies me because I never thought I'd allow myself to be vulnerable like this again, but you make me want to risk it." Joy blossomed in Lillian's chest, bright and warm. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, telling myself it was inappropriate or too soon, but the truth is, the thought of leaving you tomorrow has been breaking my heart." Hayes's face lit up with a smile unlike any she had seen from him before, open, unguarded, filled with hope. "So you'll consider my offer?" "To court properly, yes," Lillian said, her own smile matching his. "Yes, I would like that very much." Hayes lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you," he said simply. They sat together on the bench for a long time, talking about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Hayes told her more about his childhood in Missouri, his parents who had died when he was young, the aunt who had raised him. Lillian shared stories of her strict Boston upbringing, her decision to become a teacher despite her father's disapproval, her dreams of someday having a family of her own. As the night grew cooler, Hayes finally stood and offered his hand. "We should get back, you have a big day tomorrow." Lillian took his hand and rose. "Hayes, about tomorrow, I still plan to move into the schoolhouse quarters. I think it's important for the townspeople to see me as committed to my position, at least at first." "I understand," Hayes assured her, "and I agree. We'll do this properly, Lillian. I want to court you the way you deserve to be courted." As they walked back to the house, Hayes's hand warm around hers, Lillian felt a sense of rightness she had never experienced before. She had come to Arizona seeking a new beginning, and through an unexpected twist of fate, she had found it not with George Wilson, but with Hayes Kilpatrick, a man who had captured her heart when she least expected it. The school dedication the next day was a success by any measure. Nearly every family in Douglas attended, along with most of the town's business owners and civic leaders. The schoolroom looked bright and inviting, with fresh flowers on the teacher's desk and children's names already written on slates at each seat. Lillian, dressed in her best blue dress, greeted each family warmly, learning the names of her future students and answering parents' questions about her teaching methods and expectations. Hayes arrived with Martha and Tom, who was still using crutches but healing well. Lillian felt her heart skip when she saw Hayes enter, looking handsome in his Sunday suit, his hair neatly combed beneath his hat, which he promptly removed upon entering the building. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Hayes gave her a small, private smile that sent warmth spreading through her chest. They had agreed to keep their new understanding discreet for now, at least until the school was well established and the townspeople had accepted Lillian as their teacher. When it came time for the formal dedication, Mr. Daniels called for attention and made a brief speech about the importance of education to the growing town. Then he introduced Hayes. Hayes stepped forward, looking somewhat uncomfortable with the attention but determined nonetheless. "I'm a rancher, not a speechmaker," he began, drawing chuckles from the crowd. "But I know the value of learning, even though I didn't have much formal education myself. Douglas is growing, and our children deserve the best start we can give them." He turned slightly to look at Lillian. "We're fortunate that Miss Fairchild has chosen to make her home among us. She brings experience, dedication, and a genuine care for children that can't be taught. I believe she'll make this school something we can all be proud of, and I encourage everyone to support her in every way possible." There was enthusiastic applause, and Lillian felt tears threatening at Hayes's sincere words. When it was her turn to speak, she managed to thank everyone who had contributed to making the school a reality, promising to do her best for their children. After the formal speeches, cake and coffee were served, and the children were allowed to explore the classroom and find their assigned seats. Lillian circulated among the families, answering questions and getting to know her future students. Hayes kept his distance for the most part, though she was aware of his presence across the room. Once, when she glanced his way, she caught him watching her with an expression of such tenderness that it nearly took her breath away. Late in the afternoon, as the gathering was breaking up, Hayes approached her. "Everything went well," he said. "You've already won them over." "I hope so," Lillian replied. "I want to be worthy of their trust." "You will be," Hayes assured her. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I know you're settling in here tonight, but I was wondering if you might join me for dinner tomorrow after church at the hotel restaurant," Lillian smiled. "I would like that very much." "Good." Hayes looked relieved. "I'll call for you at noon then." As promised, after church the next day, Hayes escorted Lillian to the hotel restaurant for dinner. It was strange to be sitting across from him in public, knowing that they were now officially courting, even if they were being discreet about it. "How does it feel to be in your own place?" Hayes asked as they enjoyed their meal. "Different," Lillian admitted. "Quieter than the ranch. I missed the sounds of the horses and the men talking outside. And did you sleep well?" "Not really," she confessed with a small laugh. "I kept waking up, thinking I heard something, then realizing it was just the wind or the building settling." Hayes nodded understandingly. "It takes time to get used to new surroundings. When I first moved into the ranch house, I couldn't sleep for weeks. Too used to the bunkhouse with all the men snoring around me." Their conversation flowed easily, touching on the upcoming school week, Hayes's plans for winter cattle management, and books they had both read. Lillian found herself relaxing in his company, enjoying the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with someone whose company she genuinely enjoyed. After dinner, Hayes walked her back to the schoolhouse. At the door, he removed his hat, looking suddenly shy. "Would it be all right if I called on you Wednesday evening? I know you'll be busy with the school, but—" "I would like that," Lillian said quickly. "Perhaps you could stay for supper. I'm not as good a cook as Martha, but I can manage a simple meal," Hayes smiled. "I'd like that." Until Wednesday then. He hesitated, then leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. Good night, Lillian. The touch of his lips against her skin sent a flutter through Lillian's stomach. Good night, Hayes. The next few weeks established a pattern in Lillian's new life. Her days were filled with teaching, which she found both challenging and rewarding. The children of Douglas were eager to learn, though their previous education had been spotty at best. Some of the older boys had never attended school at all, having been needed for ranch work, and required extra patience and encouragement. Hayes called on her twice a week, Wednesday evenings and Sunday afternoons after church. Sometimes they would have dinner at the hotel, other times Lillian would cook for him in her small quarters. Occasionally, they would take walks around the town or ride in Hayes's buggy to the outskirts where they could talk privately. Their courtship progressed slowly but steadily. Hayes was always a gentleman, respectful of Lillian's position in the community and careful of her reputation. But there were moments, a lingering touch, a gaze held too long, a kiss on her hand that sent warmth spreading up her arm that hinted at deeper feelings beneath his controlled exterior. By mid-November, the weather had turned colder, and whispers of their courtship had spread through Douglas. Lillian noticed the knowing smiles from mothers at school dismissal and the occasionally teasing comments from shopkeepers when Hayes accompanied her on errands. "People are talking about us," she mentioned to Hayes one Sunday as they drove back from a picnic at a sheltered spot near the creek. "Does that bother you?" he asked, glancing at her with concern. Lillian considered the question. "No, not really. I just hope it doesn't affect how the parents view me as a teacher." "If anything, I think they respect you more," Hayes said. "You're not just the Eastern school teacher anymore, you're becoming part of the community." Lillian smiled at that. "I do feel more at home here every day. The children are wonderful and everyone has been so welcoming." Hayes was quiet for a moment, then said, "Christmas will be here soon. Do you have plans for the school?" "Yes, we're preparing a small pageant," Lillian explained. "The children will recite poems and sing carols. Several parents have offered to help with costumes and refreshments." "And what about your own Christmas plans?" Hayes asked, his tone carefully casual. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," Lillian admitted. "School will be on holiday for 2 weeks. I suppose I'll stay here and prepare for the next term." Hayes's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I was hoping. That is, I wondered if you might consider spending Christmas at the Lazy K. Martha always prepares a special dinner for the Hands and their families. It's become something of a tradition." Lillian felt a surge of pleasure at the invitation. "I would love that, Hayes, thank you," he smiled, relief evident in his expression. "Good, that's settled then." As they neared the schoolhouse, Hayes slowed the horse. "Lillian, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." The seriousness of his tone made Lillian's heart beat faster. "Yes." Hayes drew the buggy to a stop and turned to face her, taking her gloved hands in his. "These past weeks have been the happiest I can remember, being with you. It's changed me, changed how I see my future." "Hayes," Lillian whispered, hardly daring to hope what might come next. "I know it's soon," he continued, "and I promise to court you properly, but my feelings have only grown stronger with each passing day. I find myself thinking about you constantly, missing you when we're apart, counting the hours until I can see you again." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say, not very eloquently, is that I love you, Lillian Fairchild. I love your intelligence, your courage, your kindness. I love how you care for your students, how you've embraced this community, how you make me feel when I'm with you." Tears filled Lillian's eyes as joy bloomed in her chest. "I love you too, Hayes. I think I have almost from the beginning, though I was afraid to admit it even to myself." Hayes's face lit with happiness. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Then, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not immediately, I know you're committed to the school term, but perhaps in the spring." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained, "the only thing of hers I still have." Lillian felt tears spill onto her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Hayes Kilpatrick, I will marry you." Hayes slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you, Lillian?" Properly this time, at her nod, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a tender, reverent kiss that spoke of promises and dreams fulfilled. Lillian felt as though her heart might burst with happiness as she returned his kiss, her hands resting lightly on his chest. When they finally parted, Hayes rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again," he murmured. "Thank you for giving me a second chance at love." "And thank you," Lillian replied softly, "for being at that depot when I needed you most." News of their engagement spread quickly through Douglas. Most reactions were positive. Hayes was respected in the community, and Lillian had proven herself a dedicated teacher. There were a few raised eyebrows at the relatively brief courtship, but those were primarily from older residents who held to more traditional timelines. The school board was supportive but concerned about losing their teacher. Lillian assured them she intended to complete the school year and would help find a suitable replacement for the following term. "We'll be living at the Lazy K," she explained to Mr. Daniels, "but it's not so far that I couldn't continue teaching if necessary." "Nonsense," Mr. Daniels replied. "You'll have a ranch to help run and, God willing, a family to start, but we appreciate your dedication, Miss Fairchild." As Christmas approached, excitement grew among Lillian's students about the holiday pageant. Even the older boys, initially reluctant to participate in anything resembling a performance, had been persuaded to join in when Lillian assigned them the more dignified roles of narrators and wise men. The evening of the pageant, the schoolroom was packed with families. Hayes sat in the front row, his expression a mixture of pride and amusement as Lillian's students performed their pieces with varying degrees of success. There were forgotten lines, an angel who lost her halo, and a wise man who sneezed so explosively during Silent Night that his paper crown flew off. But overall, the performance was deemed a resounding success. Afterward, as the families enjoyed refreshments and the children showed off their school projects, Hayes approached Lillian with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "An early Christmas gift," he explained. "I thought you might want it for the holiday." Curious, Lillian unwrapped the package to find a framed photograph her own likeness, taken at a studio in Bisbee without her knowledge. "When did you arrange this?" she asked, surprised. Hayes looked slightly sheepish. "Remember when you went shopping with Martha last month? I may have suggested she take you to the photography studio for a surprise. The photographer sent me the finished portrait last week." "But why?" Lillian asked, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift but confused by its purpose. "For the mantle at the ranch," Hayes explained. "I wanted your image there for Christmas, even if you can't move in permanently until after the school year." Lillian was deeply moved by the sentiment. Hayes wanting her presence in his home, even if only in a photograph, was a gesture that spoke volumes about his feelings for her. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's a perfect gift." The following week, school closed for the Christmas holiday, and Lillian packed a small valise for her stay at the Lazy K. Hayes came to collect her on Christmas Eve morning, his face alight with pleasure at the prospect of having her at the ranch for the holiday. "Martha's been cooking for days," he told her as they drove, "and the men have decorated the main house with pine boughs and berries. It's quite festive." Indeed, when they arrived at the Lazy K, Lillian was charmed by the transformation. The usually practical ranch house had been adorned with greenery, red ribbons, and candles. A large pine tree stood in the corner of the main room, decorated with paper stars, strings of berries, and small carved wooden ornaments that Hayes explained had been made by some of the men. Martha welcomed Lillian with a warm embrace. "We've put you in your old room," she said. "Everything's ready for you." That evening, as promised, the ranch hands and their families gathered for a Christmas Eve supper. The long table in the main room groaned under the weight of roast beef, turkey, mashed potatoes, various vegetables, and several kinds of pie. Hayes sat at the head of the table with Lillian at his right, looking more relaxed and happy than she had ever seen him. After the meal, several of the men produced instruments: a guitar, a fiddle, a harmonica, and began playing Christmas carols. Everyone joined in the singing, and later the furniture was pushed aside for dancing. Hayes led Lillian in a waltz, holding her closer than propriety might strictly allow, but no one seemed to mind. As they moved around the room, Lillian felt a profound sense of belonging. These people, Hayes, Martha, Tom, the ranch hands and their families, had become her community, her home in a way Boston never had been. "Happy," Hayes murmured in her ear as they danced. "More than I ever thought possible," Lillian replied truthfully. Later, after the party had ended and the guests had departed to their own cabins or the bunkhouse, Hayes and Lillian sat together on the porch, despite the chilly night air. Hayes had wrapped a warm blanket around Lillian's shoulders, and they sat close, watching the stars in the clear desert sky. "I have another gift for you," Hayes said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small envelope. "This one's more practical than romantic, I'm afraid." Curious, Lillian opened the envelope to find a deed inside to George Wilson's property. "I don't understand," she said, looking at Hayes questioningly. "Wilson's land adjoins mine to the east," Hayes explained. "It was going to be sold at auction for back taxes, so I bought it. 20 acres and a small house that needs some work, but it's solid, I thought, if you wanted. We could make it our home after we're married. Start fresh in a place that's ours together, not just mine." Tears filled Lillian's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Hayes was offering her a home that would be truly theirs, not simply his ranch where she would be the newcomer. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Hayes smiled, relieved by her reaction. "We can ride over tomorrow if you'd like to see it. It's only about 2 miles from here." "I'd like that very much." Hayes hesitated, then reached for her hand. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, about our wedding." "Yes, I know we said spring, but I wonder if you might consider a slightly earlier date, perhaps late March during your school's Easter break. That would give us a week for a small wedding trip before you'd need to return to finish the term." Lillian considered the suggestion. "March would be lovely, but where would we go for a wedding trip?" "I thought perhaps San Francisco," Hayes said. "You mentioned once that you've never seen the Pacific Ocean." "San Francisco?" Lillian exclaimed, delighted by the idea. "That would be wonderful." Hayes squeezed her hand. "Then it's settled. We'll be married in March, take a week in San Francisco, and return in time for you to finish the school year. Then in June, once you've found your replacement, you can move to the ranch permanently or to Wilson's place, if we have it ready by then." The future stretching before them seemed bright with promise. Lillian leaned her head against Hayes's shoulder, content in the knowledge that her impulsive journey west, though it had begun in disappointment, had led her to a happiness greater than she could have imagined. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. After a breakfast of cinnamon rolls, eggs, and bacon, Hayes harnessed his best horses to the sleek buggy he used for special occasions, and they set out to visit what would become their new home. The Wilson property was indeed close to the Lazy K, connected by a well-traveled dirt road that wound through mesquite and oak trees. As they crested a small hill, Lillian caught her first sight of the house, a modest but well-proportioned structure built of adobe and timber, with a wide porch across the front and several outbuildings nearby. "It needs work," Hayes cautioned as they approached. Wilson was a bachelor, and it shows. The interior was indeed plain and somewhat neglected, but Lillian could see the potential immediately. There were 3 bedrooms, a good-sized kitchen with a proper stove, a dining area, and a comfortable main room with a stone fireplace. Large windows let in plenty of light, and the wooden floors, though in need of polishing, were solid. "I love it," Lillian declared as they completed their tour. "It feels like a real home already." "I thought we might expand the porch around to the side," Hayes suggested. "And perhaps add a room at the back for a proper study or library. I know how much you love your books." The thought that Hayes had already been planning improvements with her preferences in mind touched Lillian deeply. "That would be wonderful, and perhaps a garden here." She indicated an area near the kitchen door. "Wherever you like," Hayes agreed. "This is to be your home, Lillian. I want you to make it exactly as you wish." Later, as they rode back to the Lazy K, Lillian found herself filled with excitement about their future together. The house on Wilson's property, their house, would be a perfect blend of their lives. Close enough to the ranch for Hayes to manage his business, yet separate enough to be truly their own. The winter passed quickly. Lillian returned to her teaching duties after the Christmas break, and Hayes began the process of renovating their future home. Every Wednesday and Sunday, he would update her on the progress: the new porch railings, the freshly plastered walls, the vegetable garden he was preparing for spring planting. In February, Martha accompanied Lillian to Bisbee to commission a wedding dress from the town's best seamstress. They chose a pattern of elegant simplicity, a cream-colored silk with lace accents at the collar and cuffs, and a modest train that would be practical for a church wedding. "You'll make a beautiful bride," Martha declared as the seamstress took Lillian's measurements. "Hayes won't know what hit him." Lillian blushed at the praise, but couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. In just over a month, she would be Hayes Kilpatrick's wife, a future she could never have imagined when she stepped off the train in Douglas last September. As March approached, wedding preparations intensified. The ceremony would be held in the Douglas church with Reverend Collins officiating, followed by a reception at the hotel. Hayes had insisted on bearing all the expenses, despite Lillian's protests that she should contribute from her teacher's salary. "Consider it my wedding gift to you," he said firmly. "Besides, as my wife, what's mine will be yours anyway." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. In addition to her teaching duties, Lillian was helping to interview potential replacements for the fall term, finalizing wedding arrangements, and packing her belongings for the move to their new home. Hayes, meanwhile, was working tirelessly to ensure the house would be ready when they returned from San Francisco. He hired additional men to speed the renovations and personally oversaw every detail, wanting everything to be perfect for Lillian. Finally, the wedding day arrived, a clear, mild Saturday in late March. Lillian woke in her schoolhouse quarters for the last time as a single woman, both nervous and excited about the day ahead. Martha arrived early to help her dress, bringing with her a small blue handkerchief embroidered with lilies. "Something borrowed and blue," she explained, tucking it into Lillian's sleeve. "It was my mother's. Bring it back when you return from San Francisco." Lillian's eyes filled with tears at the gesture. "Thank you, Martha, for everything. You've been like family to me." "And now I will be family," Martha said, squeezing her hands, "at least of a sort." The church was filled with well-wishers, Lillian's students and their parents, townspeople who had come to know and respect her, ranch hands from the Lazy K, and a few of Hayes's business associates from neighboring towns. At the front of the church stood Hayes, looking more handsome than Lillian had ever seen him, in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. As Lillian walked down the aisle on Mr. Daniel's arm, who had graciously offered to stand in for her absent father, she saw Hayes's expression change from nervousness to awe. His blue eyes never left her face as she approached, and when Mr. Daniels placed her hand in his, she felt him trembling slightly. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. When Hayes slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her mother's engagement ring, his hands were steady, his gaze intense with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Collins declared. "Mr. Kilpatrick, you may kiss your bride." Hayes cupped Lillian's face gently in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. There was a smattering of applause from the congregation, and then they were walking back down the aisle together, husband and wife at last. The reception at the hotel was a joyous affair. There was dancing, abundant food, and speeches offering good wishes for the couple's future happiness. Lillian's students presented them with a handmade quilt, each child having contributed a square, and the town council gifted them with a fine set of china dishes. As the celebration continued, Hayes drew Lillian aside for a moment of privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Kilpatrick?" he asked softly. The new name sent a thrill through Lillian. "Very happy, Mr. Kilpatrick," she replied, squeezing his hand, Though it will take some time to get used to my new name. We have a lifetime for that, Hayes said, his eyes warm with love. A lifetime together, Lillian. Sometimes I still can't believe my good fortune. Nor I mine, Lillian admitted. To think that if George Wilson had met me at the depot that day, I never would have known you. Hayes's expression grew serious. I believe some things are meant to be, Lillian. Perhaps it wasn't chance that brought you to Arizona or chance that I happened to be at the depot that day. Perhaps it was always supposed to be us, finding each other. Lillian had never been one for fatalistic thinking, but in that moment she could believe Hayes was right. Something had drawn her across the country, something beyond George Wilson's advertisement for a mail-order bride. Perhaps it had been destiny after all. Late in the afternoon, Hayes and Lillian bid farewell to their guests and departed for the train station. They would travel overnight to Tucson, then catch the westbound train to California the next day. Martha had packed a hamper of food for their journey, and Hayes had arranged for a private compartment to ensure their comfort. As the train pulled away from Douglas, Lillian looked out the window at the town that had become her home. In just 7 months, her life had transformed completely. She had arrived a stranger, alone and uncertain, and was leaving as Hayes Kilpatrick's wife, with a community of friends and a future full of promise. Hayes sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Having second thoughts, he asked, noticing her pensive expression. Lillian turned to him with a smile. Not at all, just marveling at how much has changed since I first arrived here. It feels like a lifetime ago. The best is yet to come, Hayes promised, drawing her closer. Our life together is just beginning, Lillian. As the train carried them westward toward San Francisco and their future, Lillian rested her head on her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the unexpected twist of fate that had left her alone at the Douglas depot had led her to the greatest happiness she had ever known. And in the years that followed, through the joys of building their home together, the births of their 3 children, the growth of both the ranch and the town of Douglas, Lillian often thought back to that moment when a stranger had removed his hat and offered her sanctuary. Hayes Kilpatrick had promised to be hers that day, and he had kept that promise in ways neither of them could have imagined. Their love story, born of chance and nurtured by mutual respect and understanding, became something of a legend in Douglas, the tale of the mail-order bride who found her true groom not in the man she had traveled to meet, but in the cowboy who had been waiting for her all along. Though neither of them had known it, until fate brought them together on that dusty Arizona platform.